Welcome to Psalm 2. Nations gather against the Lord. The second psalm begins with titles at the very beginning before verse 1. This will happen throughout most of the book of Psalms. We'll have these titles. Where these titles came from, if they were original or somebody added them later, they're really unknown, but they have been around for a long time. And here it begins psalmos, a psalm. That's a direct transliteration into psalm. To David. The two, it's an elision. It means a psalm attributed to David. And this occurs with other people, with Asaph and Haman, so forth. Psalms that are attributed to whoever it is. And it begins with a verse that is quoted in the New Testament, in Acts 4:25 and 26. Why do nations neigh, and peoples meditate vain things? The kings of the earth stood by, and the rulers gathered together against the Lord and against his Christu. Now the gathering together, the nations, today as I'm speaking, or right now as I'm speaking, missiles are raining down on Jerusalem and Israel, and the nations are people that are not Jews. Christians are a holy nation, we'll see later, but the nations of the world, countries and so forth that are not Jews, or most of them, quite a few are against Israel, especially the Muslim countries. And it mentions how they will come against Israel. In the book of Ezekiel, it mentions that. I think it's like the 38th chapter, 39th chapter of Ezekiel. And that may be very well what's going to happen real soon here. Today is, I think it's the 11th of May 2021. And so we go up and we see where here it says, it begins in Acts as he's talking, and they heard after the chief priests, Jews, kicked these people out and they went back, the Christians, they went back, and how they were being attacked, and as really God. And it says, the one having spoken, who is Jesus, through the mouth of David, your servant, saying, why do nations neigh, and peoples meditate upon vain things? The kings of the earth stood, and the rulers gathered together against the Lord and against his Christu. Now they're assigning the Christu to Jesus the Christ. In the Old Testament, the argument would be to the Jews that this was David, which could be argued because David was called the Christu, the Christ, Christos. For they gathered together in truth against the Holy One, your servant, Jesus. So we see the usage of this verse in the New Testament relating to Jesus. And then 3, it begins, we should tear up their bonds and throw away from us their yoke. Who is the we and their yoke? It could be Israel, because it mentions in Luke 21:24, in Jerusalem, Jesus says in Luke, will be for treading by nations, which it has been, taken over many times, conquered by other nations, until the times of the nations should be fulfilled. And now, if Israel defeats all these nations that come against it, then basically we are in that period of time, where the times of the nations. Now, many Christians have felt like, well, then this means Jesus is going to have been returned, and the Christians are going to be gone. Or there's all sorts of ideas that Israel will be like a Christian nation or something. It just goes on and on. But then Jesus continues and says, and there will be signs in the sun and moon and stars, and upon the earth conflict of nations and perplexity of resounding sea and tossing about, men fainting from fear and expectation of the things coming to the inhabitable world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Now, this is a lot of things that are going to happen over, could be a long period of time. Doesn't necessarily mean one thing is going to happen to another instantaneously. We see in 2 Thessalonians that it begins with the things that have to happen at the end. The man of sin will go in to the temple. Well, there isn't another temple right now in Israel, but the man of sin will go into a temple, it mentions, and proclaim himself as God. So this could very well be what happens after this war, but that's talking about the time of the nations are over. Israel defeats all the nations that comes against it, and becomes a world power, tears down the Dome of the Rock mosque, and builds its own temple. The man of sin, who's probably going to be Jewish, comes into it, proclaims himself as God. He might be the ruler of a country at that time, or a general or a conqueror. And then it says after that, the believers will be gathered. So that would make it more of a mid-tribulation. The people, Christians, I'm sorry, first there's going to be the Great Defection. And we haven't seen that yet, but I've read about the United States, over 120 Christian, Jewish, Catholic schools have closed up. Churches are closing up. Schools are closing up. Everything's going online. Seeing things at home. As things get bad, many people will probably leave Christ and God. And that could be very well another thing that's going to happen first. And then it continues in 4, the one dwelling in heavens laughs out loud at them, at the nations, and the Lord derides them. They don't have any control of what's going on. I watch the news, and these Muslim newscasters, it's all about their God or their nations. They're so strong, they could just wipe out Israel overnight. The Iranians think that. Now the Turkish president is threatening Israel and meeting up with the Russian ruler. So all these things are happening right now as I'm speaking. I'm going in for a hip replacement here in a couple of weeks, and I hope nothing happens where I get postponed. I'm really looking forward to getting a new hip, so pray for me. Appreciate it. And then, so after God derides them. God is in control. So we just have to sit back and watch what God is going to do. What can I do? Nothing. Then he shall speak to them in his anger, and in his rage he shall disturb them, the nation. So it sounds like this is possibly what's going to happen now that the time of the nations are over. God has a plan for Israel, and then Israel will not be a Christian nation, and it will be destroyed by the man of sin, the beast. And it says, but I was placed king by him over Mount Zion. Now who is the I and who is the him in the his holy place? Well, we know his holy place would be God. So him would be God. But I, whoever the I was placed king by him over Mount Zion. I could be either David or Jesus. Both they are both. David was the king, and then Jesus will be a king again. And he's declaring the order of the Lord. The Lord said to me, so now here, see, I don't see where this could be David. You are my son, I today engendered you. And this is Acts 13:33. It says that this God has fulfilled, as he's talking to the people, to us their children, having raised up Jesus. And as in the second psalm, so it even says the second psalm, it has been written, you are my son, I today have engendered you, in the Greek. Now, Paul's not using the Hebrew, and he's calling it psalmos. It's right up here, a psalm. He's using the Greek text that we are. And then in Hebrews 1:5, the argument of the writer of Hebrew, of who he is, it says, for to whom said he, that is God, at any time or other, of angels, you are my son, I today engendered you. No, he didn't. It was to Christ. And again, I will be to him for father, and he will be to me for a son. Couldn't have been the angel, and couldn't have been David. It could only be Christ. If you're Jewish and you read this and hear about it, think about that. It's what was written before Christ came along in the book of Psalms. And then in verse 8, ask from me, and I will give to you nations for your inheritance. Could be talking about David, or he could be talking about Christ, which I believe is talking about, because this is all that relates to the future. And for your possession, the ends of the earth. Christ will come and he will reign over the whole earth. But how is he going to reign? In weakness and be crucified? No. In Revelation, quotes this in 2:27, you shall tend them with a rod of iron. As vessels of a potter, you shall break them. And the one that says in Revelation, the one overcoming and the one giving heed until the end of my works, I will give to him authority over the nations. Well, you could say it is Jesus or us that are overcoming until the end. That he shall tend them with a rod of iron, as the vessels made of clay shall be broken, as I also have received from my Father, and I will give to him the morning star, it says. Now, is this a person or us, the believers? Hopefully, it is us, the believers. And it says, now, O kings, perceive. Let all the ones judging the earth be instructed. God is in charge. Serve to the Lord in fear. Phobia comes from that word. And exalt to him with trembling. Give him the praise, give him the glory, give him the acknowledgement that he is the ruler of the world. Nobody wants to believe that God is in control. It's Satan is in a certain amount of control because God has allowed him to do his deeds, because he tells Jesus that he has been given, he's the Lord of the earth, and the things of the earth God tells us not to get involved in, the things of politics and everything. Stay with Christ during these hard times. Realize that he is in control and he will guard and protect you. And if anything bad does happen, then God has a purpose for it. We're not to fear, but to exalt God, and tell ourselves and others that God is in charge of all this. He's going to take care of it. Grab a hold of God. Believe in Jesus. Grab instruction. Read the Word. Lest at any time you should provoke the Lord to anger. And you shall perish from out of the just way, whenever his rage should be quickly kindled. Blessed are all the ones yielding upon him. Now I mentioned at the excuse me, about the other nations. This is in 1 Peter 2:9. But you, that's us, are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, separated, a people for procurement. God wants us so that you should publish the virtues of the one calling you from out of darkness into his wonderful light. The one at some time or other not a people, not a nation, but now you are a people of God. The ones not being shown mercy, but now are shown mercy. So, beloved, I appeal to you as sojourners and immigrants to be at a distance from the fleshly desires and so forth. You can read that in 1 Peter 2:9. Psalms 3, the Lord is our protector, and we definitely need protection from the evil one and from other things, from people and circumstances. We'll find out about how the Lord is our protector if we continue and go into Psalm 3, our next video seminar. Hope you'll join us. Until then, God bless.